Accutron Watches present. From New York City, this is the Accutron Show, a time travel through American culture with your hosts, Bill McCuddy, Scott Alexander, and David Graver. Visit AccutronWatch.com and discover the brand that has made American history with an all-new proprietary next-generation electrostatic energy movement. Accutron. It's not a timepiece, it's a conversation piece.
And it's nice to get to play a part, as their label. We're just augmenting what they do. So if they write a song, we'll just help them get it to more people. I mean, that's really, in its essence, what a record label should be doing these days, is helping you reach as many people.
The person you heard at the top of the show is today's guest, James Krents. He's the head of the iconic music label Verve Records. But first up, me, Bill McCuddy, along with culture writer Scott Alexander and editor David Graver. We're going to discuss everything that is jazz. Yes, jazz. So listen up, and we'll be right back with this episode of the Accutron Show. Stay tuned, Daddy-O.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our iconic Space View 2020 collection, recreating the stunning visual impact of the original open dial design combined with an all-new electrostatic energy movement. Time just changed again. The Accutron Space View 2020.
Did you guys see La La Land?
Oh, of course.
Indeed,
Okay,
yeah.
Great movie. John Legend and Ryan Gosling are big jazz guys. And Emma Stone says jazz belongs in elevators. And I have to say that there's nothing more divided in the world when it comes to music than people who do
contemporary
like
jazz,
But some
soft
people love
jazz.
jazz and some people don't love
Jazz
jazz.
means something different to absolutely everyone. It's hard to define it very, very
That's
clearly.
the whole point of jazz, man.
Historically and it has been diluted and
I don't know if you guys saw
diluted.
the Tron reboot, but at
Indeed.
one point he called them bioelectrical jazz.
I wondered where the Tron reboot was going with the jazz music
It could even be
movement.
AI software constructs.
What
Could
is
be
jazz to you? What is jazz to you?
It's freedom. Freedom and musical freedom, and I think that's what bothers a lot of people about it is every time someone thinks they know what jazz is, someone comes along and goes like, no, it's not. It's
That
like
doesn't
this.
make
Blah, blah, blah,
sense.
I'm gonna
I
do
I
this
love
other
that.
thing.
I agree with that.
I think it's improv.
It's like,
I
what's
think
punk?
It's
It's
like,
the same thing. What's punk? Like punk is pushing back and
Against
doing
something.
it and doing it yourself.
Yes.
like Verve Records, like the label itself,
Verve
and
Records.
the man who is behind discovering some of the biggest talents in the music business for the last 20 or 30 years. And Verve is not a label that you'd heard of like Decca or RCA or anything like that, but they have a niche and they're very good at it. And we're going to hear
A
more
niche
about it.
that has Elvis Costello on it.
Well, okay,
And Ella Fitzgerald and Nina Simone.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a wide niche, is what I'm
Listen,
saying.
man.
As niches go, it's a pretty expansive one. I mean, are we buying music the same way we used to?
And are we consuming it?
Yes,
the same
Bill,
way?
we're buying music the same way we used to on cassette.
Cassettes are coming back.
No,
No,
the entire
cassettes
music
are coming
industry-
back.
Newsflash: the entire music industry has been remade, Bill. I don't know where you've been.
Wait, do you guys remember 8-track and how it would be in the middle of a song sometimes and it would change tracks? Like Edgar Winter's Frankenstein is going dun 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 dun, and there's this pause and it goes ka-ching. That was the technology.
I think I arrived with the onset of cassettes, so I think I'm.
probably. This 8-track thing is a little crazy for you.
I just like that the 8-track just kept going and going and going and going. That was the neatest technology, the Mobius loop.
It was a loop.
Yeah,
It was
exactly. But
just
that's
a
neat.
loop.
That's better than a record. That's better than a cassette.
Do you listen to music? Are you playing music when you work?
Not when I work. I can't write to music, but I listen to it all the time.
We should be playing some right now.
I listen to jazz all the time, to be perfectly honest.
Well, we clearly have a lot of musical questions, and we will have them all answered on the Accutron Show when our guest James Krents joins us after this.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our Accutron DNA collection. Reimagined for a new generation, the Accutron DNA combines breakthrough technology, precise engineering, and modern aesthetics to achieve a new level of technical excellence. The Accutron DNA, the new face of time for those who blaze new trails.
Jamie, my first question is, do you ever not listen to music? Do you have a time when you can turn it off?
Yes. Yes. Ironically, you'd be surprised. I do exercise, and I don't listen to music when I exercise, which might explain the results. But I try to listen to podcasts when I exercise, and the rest of my day, I'm either talking about, going to see, playing, or listening to music. So it's a good question. The majority of my life is spent with some sort of music happening, and that's sort of oddly my sanctuary is that rare half an hour when I exercise.
Well, we were talking about how some of us do and some of us don't listen to music while we're working, but is that becoming less and less a thing or more and more a thing? Does the next generation listen to music when they're working?
My sense is this generation, these next generations, still listen to music's being consumed more than ever. I think the difference is that sometimes for this generation it can be a bit peripheral. Like it's on, but you're swiping on Instagram and you're doing 55 things at a time. Whereas I'm 46 and I still remember listening to music without another activity happening.
Listen,
Right, that being the primary thing that you were doing.
Right.
Look at the liner notes.
That's my primary activity right now. I'm looking at the liner notes. Great point. And that's another thing that's missing is most of the digital service providers don't provide the liner notes. So you don't have that thing where you're kind of, who's playing drums on? I mean, there's a reason I didn't date much besides what I look like. I was very obsessed with checking out who played on these records, who produced them, and then now it's so easy with the internet to then go down that rabbit hole. But back then
you would
just
make these
read
little
them.
discoveries, and you'd say like, oh, the same drummer played on these two records, but they're completely different.
Exactly, and then similarly with labels, you would say, oh, well, this logo, when I see that Island palm tree for Island Records or the Motown
Specific
logo,
vibe,
now I feel like I can trust this as a brand, and I'm going to go buy. If I see another one of these records, I might buy it just because I see the label logo, and I think that's something that was probably lost for a while. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say, but I think a lot of labels are getting back to that now.
Really, you think that's been revived in the streaming era? There's a label consciousness.
Well, I don't know. Not from looking at the streaming services. I mean, not necessarily. You'd have to scroll down to the very fine print, at Spotify or Apple to see what label something is on. But I think there's an awareness of it. I think the labels have realized, including the label that I work for, we need to do a better job of having people understand the identity of something like a Verve Records. And I know my counterparts at Blue Note Records feel the same way. So there's a lot of cultivating of these brands because the catalogs are actually quite coherent. If you just want to, once you see that Verve logo, you kind of know you're going to get
that
something
coherence,
with integrity.
though, when something like Verve, where you have Ella Fitzgerald and then the Velvet Underground.
Yes.
That those are pretty orthogonal.
They are, but I think the thing that those people have in common, those artists have in common, is neither of them were actually thinking about being commercial. Now, both of those artists have, the Velvet Underground and Ella, what do they have in common? They're both icons. They're both people that the music's timeless. It wasn't about chasing a trend. Yeah. It wasn't about, necessarily going for the most obvious commercial thing at the time. But the music's now survived decades and decades and decades. And so what we're finding, the Verve catalog is so eclectic. You have Ella. You've got Louis Armstrong, but you've also got Frank Zappa and the Velvet Underground. What's that through line? And I think part of the through line is, frankly, that they've survived, and the music's timeless. And that's how we kind of explain it. And there are a lot of fans who like both. I mean, obviously Lou Reed and Ella Fitzgerald might have the two.
But chasing their vision primarily first.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Then whatever happens after that
Exactly,
happens, right.
exactly. And I think that's the...
It's fascinating to hear you say that you don't listen to music while you're at the gym. Because I think all of us grew up at a time period where the album was the piece of music, and we grew up listening to albums. Now, through streaming services, and I know I may be alone at this table thinking this, music is for doing things. You go to Spotify and you type in gym playlist, and they sort for you. They are the gatekeeper. They are the barrier. They are the organizer. Right. Music...
Or a guy named Jim's list comes up, and then you're screwed. Yeah.
I don't think music is just for doing things, but I think millennials and Gen Z use music to do things, to concentrate, to accentuate.
Their own soundtrack.
They definitely do, and that's been a great thing for us because we're always trying to figure out how to keep this music alive. Whether obviously we have a lot of living frontline artists that are great, but how do we keep people coming back to Nina Simone? How do we keep people coming back to Dinah Washington and Sarah Vaughan and Ella and Coltrane and these kinds of playlists that you're describing? Working from home playlists or yard work or peaceful piano meditative playlists. Like the breadth of the Verve catalog catalog is such that there is a place, we have something for almost all of these moments or these moods, and that's actually been great for us as a method of discovery for new people, young people, but also, there are people who are more of a pop fan, but as they get a little older, they say, I wouldn't mind something a little more relaxing. So a label like Verve, has something for you because there's a lot of beautiful, meditative, lovely music. And then if you want something really challenging and avant-garde, we've got John Coltrane, things like that are not necessarily for when you're trying to go to sleep. But there's a time and a place for all of it, so that is a big method of discovery for us now, are those mood-based or activity-based playlists. Yes. You're right.
You're owned by Universal.
Yep.
And that gives you another sandbox you can play in a little bit. So, for example, recently you said that you pitched the idea of having a Velvet Underground, who we were talking about a moment ago, a doc about them, and that's just coming out now and getting a lot of. That's got to be incredible for somebody's catalog.
There's nothing like that, and especially when you work for a company like Universal that is staffed to see something through. So there, not only do you have all these record labels. I mean, Universal's the biggest of all the major labels. So you have Motown and Island and Interscope and Republic and Verve and Blue Note, but you also have these central departments. Universal has a company called Polygram Entertainment, which is producing all these fantastic music films, whether it's Ron Howard's Beatles movie or the Amy Winehouse documentary that won an Oscar, the Velvet Underground film that we just were a participant in. It's been really great to have access to the funding, but also the expertise. They've brought in people from the film world, so it's not people like me who work at a record label who really don't know anything about film. They actually have people who do know what they're talking about to help take these things from an idea to a reality. Who should we get to direct it? How do we make amends with the Andy Warhol estate so we can cover that aspect of the Velvet Underground and those amazing album cover design, things like that. And so that's the beauty of, that's where it's very easy. I was a musician. I played in bands, and it's very easy to sort of think, the major labels, and it's so corporate, and there is sometimes a stigma. But actually, I tend to think the positives really outweigh the negatives because you get access to that kind of thing. You have the infrastructure and the scale and the global scale. I mean, so this Velvet Underground film that just came out
with Todd Haynes.
With Todd Haynes. I mean, we were able to get one of the great directors of the last 25 years to do this, who it turns out knows more about the Velvet Underground than anyone at Verve. But we were able
fired.
to well again but it also to be able to take that all over the world, to take it to the Cannes Film Festival, to take it there. That's really, I think, one of the things that still sets these bigger companies apart, is they really are global. I mean, Universal is such a global. The head of Universal is an English guy, who lives now in California, but it's a big company. But we like to think that Verve embodies sort of the best of both worlds. We still have sort of a boutique. Verve was started as an independent label by a guy named Norman Granz, because his client, Ella Fitzgerald, he didn't feel like she had a fair record deal. So he started Verve as an independent label, and it went through many iterations. But I think we try to hang on to that spirit, entrepreneurial, independent, again, not so hung up on trends and what is, particular. If we chased what was totally commercial, Universal doesn't need that from us. Universal's got tons of top 10 pop music. We're here to serve a different need.
No, I completely buy that. Like, you actually having that throw weight in the industry for music to really thrive in the current media landscape, which is so overpopulated. There's so much choice, and music is so close to my heart. I want to see it survive and thrive. So I buy that you need a big force and a big presence to really move the needle there. Is it still possible, though, for the truly independent labels that might be just starting up? Do they have a shot even in this new landscape?
I think they do. One of the things that used to differentiate labels was distribution. A lot of the draw of being on a major label used to be we had these big semi-trucks, and we could put your records and tapes and then CDs on these trucks and drive them to, the Sam Goody's and the Tower Records and the HMVs. And obviously that's not that's not what it's all about today. I mean, anyone with a laptop can make a record and distribute it. And so these labels, I think they do have a shot. I think, again, there's more music now than ever. I think part of the problem we have is what's the filter? I mean, like there used to be, there were, X number of radio stations. There was MTV and VH1. There were a couple magazines, Rolling Stone. And now it's like if you were to go on Instagram or Spotify or Pandora, there's a billion new songs every day.
Well, and is that bad? I mean, is it making bad musicians popular?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so at all. Actually, I think what it does is I think it levels the playing field. And what's interesting is that we still find that for a lot of these artists that maybe start out independently, start out with no label, start out just going viral on TikTok, that they still want ultimately to partner with a label, a major label, because they see that this is great. I got my foot in the door. I've got 1 million followers. But what does it really mean? If I went and tried to play Madison Square Garden, not during a pandemic, how many tickets how many of these people would actually show up? Because that's what we look for sometimes is you can have gaudy social media numbers, but does it translate to a real audience that's going to stay with you, that's going to buy every album, that's going to buy your expensive concert ticket, that's going to buy the T-shirt at the concert? And so I think a lot of them find that partnering with a label, with a real label, still is the key to kind of get from that sort of viral curiosity, YouTube phenomenon, whatever, to actually having a sustainable career, where it's going to be about more than one song.
I read about music every single day of my life, and in that instance, infrastructure helps. Music publicists help break through. I can be on SoundCloud for 4 hours every single day and find one song, but if I'm getting organized PR emails from labels, I know where to start my morning after I look at Stereo Gum and Pitchfork.
Exactly.
I know exactly.
They're gatekeepers, and they're still relevant. I mean, there are all these terms, that influencer. I didn't know what an influencer was.
I'm busy looking up SoundCloud.
Right. But these people do serve a great function, which is that you still know that if they bother to write about it in the New Yorker or Stereo Gum or Pitchfork or even the Atlantic. I mean, the thing that's interesting is that it's not just music outlets. It used to be you go to Rolling Stone.
It's lifestyle.
I mean, the New Yorker and the Wall Street Journal has become a fantastic place to learn about music. They actually have a great arts section. These things have changed, and it's important to acknowledge.
And I'm pretty sure Vampire Weekend is a clothing brand.
Yeah. I mean, they probably sold more clothing than records in the last 5 years. It's just concert shirts and things like that.
Is there any money in the business anymore? I mean, you mentioned the big trucks that had albums. We were talking about cassettes and 8 tracks and before you came in, and I just wonder, what's the thing? If the delivery device is my laptop, are you guys making any money?
We are. I mean, one of the things that again, these big companies like Universal has, is we have a fantastic catalog. So if we were only reliant on what the record I put out last week has sold over these few days, would that be a model that supports, a 45-person label in a big, building in Midtown? Not necessarily. But one of the things that has made Universal such a good company is that the amount of catalog. I mean, if I were to say Universal, I wouldn't just be talking about Verve. I'd be talking about the catalogs, and I won't go on and on, but the Beatles, the Stones, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Andrea Bocelli. I mean, Def Jam. It's all over the map. And so it's the aggregate of all of it. And it's a cycle. It's sustaining. And those things, that amazing catalog allows us to take chances on new artists. Because maybe it won't be that first album, for your band. If I signed your band today, I don't know how rich we'd all get.
My band
yeah,
today?
Well,
I told you guys.
Everyone in this room has a band.
Yeah.
The guy over there, the guy sitting there.
You're a bassist. You're a bass player.
Yeah, I am.
You played with Carano and M. Ward, two of my faves.
Oh, yeah. Two of my favorites too. I started out as a musician, and I was actually in a band that was on Universal. But I always had an equal interest in the other side of it, and I'm probably given my actual level of talent, I'm probably on the right side of it now. As far as, I don't know how talented I am at being a record executive, but I was a good but not amazing bass player. I still play a little bit, but it allows me, I think, to keep a little bit of perspective, because ultimately, we aren't the artist. The artists are the one who come to a company like Verve, and they have a statement to make, and they have a collection of songs. And so it's healthy, I think, sometimes to still vaguely remember what that's like, and have some perspective.
When you talk about breaking new artists, I mean, back in the day, you think of A&R guys and going out to clubs and all that whole
Radio station
thing. Yeah, is when you're doing this big filter across this new media landscape, how is that different today?
We still go out to see shows. I mean, obviously, the last year and a half has been a bit of a aberration. But for a label like ours that is still mostly about really organic artists and artists who are writing their own songs, and which isn't the way it is for every label. But our focus is still largely in those genres. we need to know that you're good live. So we do go see people before we sign them. We like to meet you. We like to see how you sound live because that is a big part of breaking an artist for these. Verve is very focused on just a couple genres these days, but all of them that I would jazz. For lack of a better term, sort of indie, alternative rock, and singer-songwriters, all of those artists need to be great live.
Jamie, you are great live. We have a flip side here. We're going to turn it over. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, is anybody buying jazz? I'm still dubious. We're also going to talk about what makes a great new artist and how you go out and find one. All this on the Accutron Show when we return.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our legacy collection, reviving some of the most memorable Accutron watches from the 60s and 70s. The legacy collection combines timeless design with the technical excellence of Swiss watchmaking, each limited to 600 individually numbered pieces. The Accutron Legacy Collection, inspired by the past, built for the future.
Jamie, welcome back. We were talking before you got here about how divisive jazz can be. Some people seem to hate it, and some people seem to love it. I brought up La La Land, the movie that with John Legend, and I just think some people think it's tremendous. And is it a hard?
Are they wrong?
Category? Yeah. And is it a hard category to sell?
It can be. I mean, I think that jazz is probably in a better place now than it was for the first 15 years I worked at Verve. There's a guy named Kamasi Washington who's not a Verve artist.
He's the best.
He's
a fine artist.
Totally objective here. Who came along, 5 or 6 years ago and had incredible commercial success with music that if you had asked anybody going into it, is this guy going to sell a lot of records? I mean, he was playing instrumental, what is often referred to as spiritual jazz, music that I think is very in the tradition of Impulse Records and John Coltrane. It's challenging music. It's beautiful, but it's very intense. It's not, it's not Ella Fitzgerald singing, Dream a Little Dream. Yeah. And amazingly, it got traction. And he ended up playing all, Coachella and all of the big rock festivals because the intensity of the performance was just as compelling as, somebody going to see the Arcade Fire or, one of the great Queens of the Stone Age. I mean, it's just as visceral. And so in the wake of that, there have been a number of artists. We have one, so I will be biased, a guy named Shabaka Hutchings out of London. There was a great scene that developed in London with this guy, Shabaka Hutchings, and he has several groups. And similarly, it gets nominated for, mainstream awards. So it has helped get jazz to a place. I know you get the question, which is there really a business there, and how do these artists survive? I mean, again, all these artists still have to tour relentlessly, and it's been very hard for jazz musicians the last year and a half, and there have been a number of charities that acknowledge that because without the live side, most of the artists can't live off of the sale of their music or the streaming of their music.
And often small, tight clubs where the band's right next to each other.
Exactly. It did not lend itself well to COVID, and multiple sets a night, and exactly. Thankfully, that's come back a bit, over the last few months in the major cities. I mean, in London, they're a little bit more out and about even than we are here in New York. But the ecosystem for jazz is pretty strong. Plus, this network of festivals. I know these iconic festivals, the Montreal Jazz Festival, the Montreux Jazz Festival, Vittoria, Umbria, Monterey in California, Newport, the great founder of the Newport Jazz Festival,
bigger
George
than
Wein,
ever. I mean, doing great.
Doing great, and still attracting.
There's an intensity to jazz fans. Like when there are fans, then they're really serious.
We said that it's a fevered crowd.
But you are right that jazz does not stream at the same cadence that Olivia Rodrigo or Billie Eilish, who are getting hundreds of millions and billions of streams, and that hasn't happened for jazz. And that is what we need to have happen so that these people don't have to.
Although I would say an artist like Billie Eilish, you hear a little jazz in her.
She loves jazz.
You can hear huge jazz influences in the way she writes.
And she's such a good singer. I mean, I think sometimes at Verve we like to get a little arrogant and talk about, if you're drawing that line between the artists we have now, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, but all the way through, we have Diana Krall. We have an artist named Tank from Tank and the Bangas. What do these people have in common? They have great voices. And Billie Eilish is right there. I mean, I think that people sometimes underrate, or Gaga, how good these artists are as singers. I mean,
And talk about live, there's
Forget it.
those tiny desk things, those things where it's unadorned, it's not running through a computer,
And you can
it's
tell.
like, oh right,
You can
really do it.
And so I think, there's a jazz influence in a lot of this music. You know, there's a guy named Thundercat who collaborates
Thundercat,
with Kendrick
yeah.
Lamar.
Yeah, amazing.
I mean, the jazz. It's not hard to find the jazz in the great artists like that, Anderson .Paak, people like that.
Do you feel like a steward for the reputation of jazz as much as you do for the legacy of all of these artists that you have on your roster?
I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way. It'd probably give me a panic attack. But I will say that we take the legacy of Verve really seriously. What we don't you don't want to be. I've worked at Verve for a long time, and in the role that I have now, I wouldn't want it to be. And then when that guy had the role he had, they signed a bunch of unlistenable music, or the quality just went down. Most of the Verve music, even from the last 20 years, you can stand behind. I feel like we've continued to build a catalog. So I do feel some responsibility just to make sure that we don't take our eye off the ball of that, again, that integrity, that if you were to try to talk about what all these are, it's a disparate group of artists. What do they have in common?
Yes.
I think that it's, it's music that most people will agree didn't compromise, and I think that's what we try to stick to.
So what do you look for in a new artist?
Well, we look across a couple genres. If it's jazz, I'm very interested in, when you look at jazz, for a long time, jazz has been about jazz standards. You hear that phrase. In fact, there's a club called the Jazz Standard. What does that mean? It means songs that have become so woven into the fabric of the American musical landscape that they're literally standards. That is the standard by which future songs are judged. And it's great to be able to interpret standards. And some of the great, Ella was one of the great interpreters. I mean, the Cole Porter songbook, is one of the seminal pieces of recorded music. But I'm so interested in finding young jazz musicians who are good composers, who aren't just relying on playing standards, but are writing what might be tomorrow's standards. And those could be instrumental, or they could be vocal. So that when we look at jazz, I really love artists who have their own voice as a composer. The level of playing, I mean, it's a good thing I am not relying on my bass playing now, because the level of technique that musicians have now, we call them YouTube phenomenons, but there are drummers that, some of them, they look like they're an octopus or something.
And they're 12.
And they're 12, exactly. So it's not so much about how great your chops are as much as it is, do you have a statement, do you have something people will listen to because the melody is so good, I mean, the same reason people still listen to the Beatles and will forever. So in jazz, I look for that. And then we're very, focused on, again, what I would call rock music. People maybe inspired by the Velvet Underground. We signed a guy named Kurt Weill, who's one of the great rock artists of today, in my opinion. And we signed him because same thing. I just think he does his own thing. I don't think he sounds like anybody
has
else.
his own thing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I saw a show he did with Courtney Barnett at the Beacon,
Right.
that the album they did together is so chill, but it's also this sort of relentless sort of driving thing, but it's really chill. And I got up to use the restroom at one point, and I looked back at the whole, and the entire place is just sitting in their chairs, like with this kind of like blown back, intent, like laid back, but also leaned forward. It's undescribable.
Oh, man.
Maxell tape.
It's really
Commercial.
Yeah,
It's like
the
that,
guy in
except
the chair,
it's
right,
not the
yeah.
Queens of the Stone Age. It's not knocking you back over. It's very
it's a
chill,
different
but
way.
it's like it's got a
Intensity.
such a vibe. Yeah, it's
There
an
is a
intensity to it.
relaxed intensity.
Yeah. So with those kinds of with the rock bands or those artists that we look at, or the singer-songwriters, it's the same thing. Just that's a very congested space. I mean, there are more people with an acoustic guitar, than ever singing, emotional songs. How do you stand out? Why occasionally do these artists come along, like Bright Eyes or Phoebe Bridgers, that just rise above everyone else? And it's because they really are great songwriters and singers. So we just try to, again, to find someone who's gonna have their own lane, and not just get filed under, oh yes, another Bob Dylan wannabe, or anything like that.
One of our lanes of interest is always the influence of the 1960s when the Accutron watch was introduced, and how it's influenced a lot of disciplines, but in your case, music. Do you hear the 60s sometimes when you listen to a new artist or an old artist? Do you go, oh, that's got a Beatles thing, or that's doing a riff from
Stan Getz
Stan Getz, or
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think sometimes we talk, especially when we're talking about jazz, we talk a lot about the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. But the 60s were that was a fulcrum for jazz. You had people starting to get very experimental. You had Coltrane doing Love Supreme. You had Miles starting to get electric. Exactly. And so I absolutely do. I mean, I think there was a fearlessness that came in the '60s, and I don't know much about the watch world, but I do know that design in general got very brave, and I think a lot of music did, and I do hear that. A lot of the artists we work with, I think, if you were to forensically go through their record collection, I think you'd see the '60s very well represented.
A lot of ways that's an entry point for younger listeners to go back in time. For me, it was The Strokes. I grew up with The Strokes and initial reviews where it's so derivative, and I loved The Strokes so much. I thought, derivative of what? So I found the Kinks and the Clash and television, and I had my own musical odyssey because of their reference to the strength of the past. And
because this band I loved was considered tired by all these old guys when I was listening to it. But that is what happens.
It is what happens.
Right. No, they were the, for lack of a better term, the gateway drug back to a lot of that. In conjunction with the Todd Haynes film, Verve released this a tribute album where we redid the Velvet Underground and Nico, the first album, but with modern artists. So we had everybody from Courtney Barnett and Kurt to King Princess to St. Vincent to all of these artists, each doing one song. We did, we had them literally go track by track. But it wasn't just artists from that generation. We had Iggy Pop do a track. And the point of doing that, again, was to use some of these younger active artists to maybe steer people back and say, well, if you like the Strokes, you should really check out, Talking Heads and Television and Tom Petty. And, it doesn't take anything away from the Strokes to say that everyone's got influences. I'm sure the design of these watches had some influence, from a previous generation. And actually, it's funny, I was when I knew I was coming here to do this, I did a little looking around to see if there was a strong tradition of, appreciation of fine watches in jazz. And one of the things I noticed actually was there are so many web pages and things about the watches that Miles Davis, who was an icon of style, or Ella Fitzgerald even, in her beautiful dresses at the Hollywood Bowl, this was not an accident. These people were very, very careful about their imaging. Louis Armstrong, Dizzy Gillespie, Sidney
And we have a
Bechet.
musical tie-in. Tuning fork. Right there in the watch.
There you go. Yeah.
Do you have vinyl at home?
I do. In fact, during the pandemic, I have probably done more vinyl shopping than I should. You sort of, so I've beefed up my home vinyl collection a lot.
Everyone has their pandemic
Yeah, right, exactly.
Does Verve still pump it out?
We do. I mean, one of the big challenges we have at the moment is the vinyl renaissance has been so strong that the plants that are left are struggling to keep up with the demand. I mean, it's the most amazing problem to have. It would be like,
what percentage of the plants are gone?
Compared to when? Compared to the height? I don't know. I don't know the exact number. I mean, we Universal was pretty out of that business, and the good news is the ones that are left are very good because they didn't stay in it because it was a cash cow. They stayed in it because they love vinyl and the sound of vinyl. But yeah, there's a huge emphasis on vinyl now.
Do you have any 8-tracks?
No, we don't have any 8-tracks.
Always with the 8-track.
We did do a reel-to-reel.
Really?
Recently on a John Coltrane reissue, which I thought was very cool.
15 inches per second?
Yeah, I think we sold 2
Really?
of them. Yeah, but it's a selfishly. But that listen, there is
it's just a fun artifact to have.
Exactly, and it just looks so great. I mean, it's absolutely So but vinyl is. I don't think vinyl's going anywhere, and I'm very happy about that. It's great. Again, to have that tactile representation of the music.
Well, we could do this all day. Yeah. This is like my favorite FM radio show that you would tune in and drive. By the way, what are the 5 presets on do you have a car?
I do have a car. It's funny. I'm trying to think, but I don't really listen to the radio. I'm the worst
That's
person
your
to
time.
ask.
No music time.
I actually really like to listen to the music that we're working on now. Some of the records that are in progress, because the car. I'm sure you guys feel the car is such a great place to listen to music, and so I don't really have a good answer for that. I listen to satellite radio sometimes, but I don't.
Where's
have a
that going? Where's all the streaming going? Is there gonna when the dust settles? Is there only going to be a Spotify? Or are there going to be 10 or 15 of those? like
I
5 years from now?
my sense is that there won't be a monopoly. I think they've each got their own personality, and the interfaces are so different. I mean, like it's sort of like if you're someone who likes using Spotify and you try to use Apple Music, it feels very difficult, and vice versa. I think
Agreed.
people get very comfortable
Tripped
with,
up by the interface.
Right. So I think luckily because they each have these other lives. I mean, Apple's obviously a great software and hardware company, and Amazon is where you might be buying your groceries, but you can also stream music there. I think a lot of them have they've each got their own church, and so I don't really see one of them putting the others out of business. I mean, we find that they're very different. They're very different to deal with, and some of them have a very different consumer base, and also some of them are more popular in certain parts of the world. So a lot of them may have a great foothold in Asia and not be as meaningful here. But I don't see any sign that they can't all thrive, because that is obviously the way people are. I mean, even if you have vinyl like I do, I still stream a lot of music. I'm pretty lazy, so I'm not always going to get up and flip the vinyl over.
Well, vinyl it's active. That's one really wonderful piece about it, that you have to. It's a very intentional way of listening.
Yeah,
You're not just like, oh, it's streamed and it went to the next song.
And you know that's the sequence that the artist wanted you to hear the songs in, and so it's actually very intentional is a great word. I mean,
And there's exercise involved. You have to get up and turn it over.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Do you make playlists? Do you share playlists?
Not really. No. I probably should, but I don't. And I also don't use like Pandora. I know some people love to go on that adventure where it kind of takes you around. And again, because I'm lucky, I have a job where I get to listen to music all the time, and people are sending me a lot of music. I don't feel as inclined to do that. I'm pretty focused on it, but I get the value of that, and I have a lot of friends who do that. I don't. I used to make mixtapes, but I think I retired.
I still do. It's like a relationship tool.
I mean,
well, it was great.
So these are forms of artificial intelligence that are making sort of playlists and sound-alike stuff and the musical DNA. There's been a little bit of experimentation with artificial intelligence for writing, which makes me very scared as a writer. Yeah. Do you think that's ever going to get there with music?
I don't know. I'm so far away from that at a label like Verve. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I've seen some demos of it, but I don't know. It so far, no.
So far, it's not there. We can definitively say no one's done it yet in a way that's convincing. But even what Vocaloid has done recently, like it sounds much more like a human voice, programmable human voice now than it used to.
Yeah, I mean, listen.
But I mean the composition piece.
Probably something will break through from that origin, but I don't know. Again,
spooky.
It's the antithesis of what I'd probably think Verve would be interested in. But just at this point, it's like my phone turns on my air conditioner, so I can't count anything out. I don't know.
Hey, we started this conversation talking about, or you said that record labels are going to have to step up a little more and say who they are and identify themselves. Let's finish on where you'll be in 5 years, or 10 years. Where will Verve be, and how will we think of it?
I'd like to think that we'll be on a very coherent extended journey from where we are now. We'll still be very much in jazz. I think sometimes people see things like, oh, Verve signed Kurt Weill, or Verve's working with this amazing group Tank and the Bangas, who are like, have a foot in hip hop and a foot in, spoken word. Are they still doing jazz? But we've done great with jazz over the last few years. To your question, Verve Jazz has been very good for Verve modern jazz. But I do think it's important that just as Verve continued to evolve in the 60s, that this, we talked about this decade, when Verve realized that they didn't just have to keep doing jazz, and that's when they signed, this amazing guy, this guy named Tom Wilson, who was an African-American guy from Texas who went to Harvard in the 50s, which is actually pretty unusual enough as it was, then went on to Columbia Records, produced Bob Dylan, signed Simon and Garfunkel, and then went to Verve, and he helped reinvent Verve. And he was the one who brought in the Velvet Underground, Frank Zappa, Richie Havens, and he basically acknowledged that jazz is no longer the pop music as it had been in the 40s and the 50s, and it was important to be an organism that continues to evolve. And I think I'd like to think in 5 years we'll basically be doing that same thing, where whatever the version of that is in 5 years, where we're not trying to compete with these amazing pop labels like Columbia or Capitol or Atlantic. I mean, there's a lot of these labels. Even within Universal, there's a lot of them. And Verve has its own path. And so I think it'll be an extension of that. Artists of integrity, artists with a point of view, and artists who are making records that, again, will become catalog favorites for decades. That's our model, is we are constantly building a catalog.
One of the things we were talking about the 60s that's always influenced music has been politics. Is that as true today as it was 40, 50 years ago?
I think so. I mean, I think the connection between music and the social justice issues of the last few years is very strong. And I think one thing that's great about the way music is made today is it can be very immediate. And you don't have to wait for a vinyl record to be pressed and put on the truck. And if something happens and you want to react to it in real time as an artist, you can do that. You can get on your laptop and we can help you get a song out in a week. And so I think, if anything, the way technology has evolved especially for us at the labels, we can help you make your statement, whether it's about race relations or an election or whatever it is, and we can get it out there quickly. There isn't that delay. So yeah, and I see a lot of our artists. Again, sometimes they just want to go on their Instagram right now and say something or sing something or play something. So I don't feel like it's any less of a I don't feel like there's any less of these sort of intentional statements being made by artists, and it's nice to get to play a part, as their label. We're just augmenting what they do. So if they write a song, we'll just help them get it to more people. I mean, that's really, in its essence, what a record label should be doing these days, is helping you reach as many people. So whether you're writing a love song or whether you're making a political statement, we can help you amplify it, and I think, and amplify it quickly. So yeah.
We are in a new era of protest anthem, and 2020 was a really exemplary year of powerful songwriting from a diverse roster of creatives.
Yeah, absolutely. We work with an artist named John Batiste, who a lot of people know. He's had an amazing year, and he was very vocal, especially in the summer of 2020, in the wake of George Floyd being killed. And it was really, I hope it doesn't sound corny, it was really an honor to just be his partner as he wanted to go out there. He had a song called We Are that he wanted to get out right away. He was leading peaceful protests in Washington Square Park, and doing these sort of New Orleans-style marches up the streets with instruments. And, again, the record label, we're really there to be his partner and to help him when he has these statements to make, help get them out there. If he has a recording of it, let's make it available. Let's make it so you can stream it right away. And he's only one of many artists who had something to say in that moment. We had an artist who, in the first 3 months of quarantine, wanted to make an album about being in quarantine. And he released the first one, named Andara, who's a great artist we have from Kenya. And same thing, we were able to put it out. He had a friend come over and take photos from 6 feet away, and you can get it out there quickly. We're not beholden to the old ways of having to wait 12 months to get something out.
You also just mentioned New Orleans, which is a noted hub of musical inspiration. Does the world function in the same way with regard to music, where a city becomes an epicenter, or has it become more democratized globally?
No, it's a great question. I think we've benefited a lot from some of these very targeted scenes. You brought up New Orleans. I mean, right now on the Verve roster, beyond Louis Armstrong, we could talk for 2 hours about Louis Armstrong, but we have Harry Connick Jr., John Batiste, Tank and the Bangas. I mean, we have 3 of our big artists are all from that same, and all 3 very different, but they're friends and they know each other, and they very much the product of that great scene in New Orleans, which has been vibrant even through the hurricanes and things like that. And similarly, what I referred to with this guy Shabaka Hutchings came out of this very vibrant East London loft party jazz scene that produced him, a woman named Nubia Garcia who records for Concord. Again, some of tomorrow's stars of jazz came out of these very identifiable, geo-targeted scenes.
But it sounds like they are creating this fertile ground in there. That's very much an alive thing, that artists need other artists to kind of develop.
You said that perfectly. Exactly. I mean, they still need fertile ground from which to come. They support it.
And that can only happen really in person.
Yep. And then it can only and again, these are cities that might still have music in schools, which is really important for this kind of music. And so a lot of these artists that probably wouldn't have made it to where they are if they hadn't had the ecosystem around them. And then they come up and then they end up making these great records, but also statements. I mean, a lot of the artists I just mentioned have extremely political, active political views, and it comes out in their music. So Verve has a great history of supporting. Nina Simone made some of the great musical political statements of all time, but so did John Coltrane. John Coltrane's Alabama about the bombing of a black church. Charlie Hayden's Liberation Music Orchestra, which was a seminal recording on Impulse. That's another, I think you asked about where would these labels be in 5 years. It's important that these labels, who knows if I'll even still be there, but these labels will continue to help these artists have a voice, because that's part of why you would want to be on a big global label, to have that big platform. And it's not just about selling your music. You might actually have something to say.
You'll still be there because you are a great voice for Verve, and we have enjoyed having you on the Accutron Show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Accutron Show. To listen to all of our shows, visit accutronwatch.com. To learn more about the world of Accutron, follow us on Instagram at AccutronWatch and subscribe to our podcast. From New York City, until next time, Accutron Time.